Well, hello everyone. Happy Saturday to all of you out there on Facebook today. Thank you so much for joining me and joining the Napa Valley Wine Academy. We have a very special guest for you today. Her name is Tanya, Morningstar darling, close personal friend of mine, super passionate wine history buff, very accomplished wine instructor. She holds the CWE. She's a French wine scholar, Italian wine scholar, Spanish wine scholar. And if that wasn't enough, she's also the official ambassador for Orvieto wines in Italy, and one of 64 ambassadors for the wines of Borgogna, which is I am as well. So that's where we actually met on a trip to Burgundy. And she is here today to talk all about her love and passion for history and Italian wine. She also runs a school up in Seattle, so Cellar Muse, where she teaches Wine Scholar Guild courses. So without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and bring Tanya here on screen so you can see who I have the pleasure of talking to. Hey Tanya, how are you?
Hi, I'm great. Happy to be here with you guys this morning, or this afternoon.
Super exciting to have you here. How's everything in Seattle?
Well, Seattle's good. Garden's growing. Had
Great.
Some rain last night, so that's good.
Awesome. Yeah, send some of that rain down here to Napa. We need it. Okay. So why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about what you do up in Seattle before we get started?
Yeah. So in Seattle, I have a little school that's hopefully going to have its own dedicated space coming this fall. Currently hosted in a restaurant in Bellevue, where I teach the Wine Scholar Guild classes, master classes on various subjects, usually French, Italian, Spanish, and California wines. And I also teach WSET and also teach at a small local college with a winemaking program.
Excellent.
Called Napa Wine Academy.
Yeah, so we met when we went to Burgundy for some education classes to become ambassadors for the region of Borgogna, and there I learned a little bit, got a little bit of taste of your passion for wine history. How did you become interested in the history side of wine?
Well, actually, I was interested in history before I was interested in wine. I started my education with a focus on art history and history of the theater. And that took me to France, where I met wine. And from a pretty young age, I became really intrigued with this idea, actually, in Europe, that people's relationship to wine really encompasses all of my interests, cultural, spiritual, nature, food, and community. And at a certain point, it became clear also that teaching about wine could incorporate my love for storytelling. So wine became the thing over the theater and art in some ways. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, you definitely, every time I hear you speak about wine or I hear you speak about wine history, the passion just comes automatically. So that's fantastic. Why do you think studying about wine history is important for wine professionals or wine enthusiasts?
Well, I think that, for me, it's just for in and of itself really fun to think about the world and how we arrived where we are today and people of the past and what their experiences must have been like. But from a practical point of view, a lot of my students, all of us in the wine world are dealing with marketing and sales in some way. Even though I'm a teacher, I don't sell anything. We're all interacting with wine as an industry. It's a product. Mm-hmm. So through looking at history, one of the practical things that people can gain, even if they don't want to be historians or super geeky wine history buffs, is this idea, looking at history is a kind of a complete picture. Even if we don't have all the pieces. And so when you look back, you can see I want to say that marketing in any moment, is about identifying what people need, what people want, and what their experience is of the product and its purpose in their lives, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you look back, those things, maybe are a little bit more clear than they are in the present. And so by analyzing history and, the politics and the social pressures and personal societal issues that people were going through and how wine fits into that. The process of unpacking that and asking ourselves, well, what were people experiencing? What did they need? What did they want then? And how did the industry respond to that in the past helps us to be able to kind of unravel that in the present. So I think that from a marketing perspective, professionals can maybe ask better questions and come up with better ways to connect with consumers.
Great. So you've taught quite a bit about history, right, in a formalized program. When did that start? And tell us a little bit about what that means to teach about wine history.
Yeah, so in 2012, I started teaching at South Seattle College at the Northwest Wine Academy, a 33-hour, so 3-credit history course that ended up blossoming into 2 history courses, History 1 and History 2, so 66 hours of wonderful wine history, starting with Neolithic times to present and all over the world. So I divided those into kind of up to the Renaissance, so Old World only, and then History 2 was the conversation between Old World and New World. And I just found my way, through my studies, teaching that class, and it's been so exciting and rewarding. I give students projects that are really exciting to grade. One of my favorite things of the year is the projects that people come up with in that class. So yeah, it's just been an incredible joy that has taken on a life of its own for me. Great.
So I know, we're working on a project together. We're really excited to come up with a wine history class for the Online Wine Academy, our online wine school. So tell me a little bit about that. Tell me about the project. We're obviously excited.
Yeah, so I've just started to work on it, and essentially I'm hoping that it's going to be a multi-part series, which will begin with a foundations course, and then move into more kind of advanced, or maybe not advanced, but specialized subjects like wine history of France or wine history of Italy, or wine history of Spain. I'm not sure exactly all of those things yet, but we'll give a foundations first, and it'll be a fully interactive course where people can take it as they want to, so I'm really excited about being able to take this information and put it into a format that people can interact with without having to come to Seattle and enroll in college.
Yeah, that's great. I know I'm looking forward to it, and as I mentioned to you before we went on air, the historic part of wine really fascinates me. I'm by no means an expert like you are in the subject, but every time I have the opportunity to learn a little bit more about history, especially as old world wines are concerned, really informing their styles and the wines that we see today. So I always like to collect old books on wines and see what the perspective of wine was during a certain period, and I think we've talked about that in the past. But people don't have to
say something about that.
Yeah.
One of the other ways that wine history can really help students of wine is that by creating really fleshed out stories around the facts that you need to remember about contemporary wines can help to connect the dots in exams and also in practical application. And so in some ways the stories that lead us to why a wine is the way it is, why the rules are the way that they are in the DOC or AOC or DO or whatever, can bring that whole picture to life so that we're not just memorizing blind facts that have very little meaning, because they all have incredible meaning that are rooted in the wine's history. So that's another really practical way. And I'll give one little caution about, I love to collect old books too, as you know, and old images and advertising. And I always say when people graduate from the scholar programs, I say, you've graduated to the level where you can look at old books. Because the danger with old books is that unless you know how things are today, then, because the information is antiquated, it can cause a lot of confusion. So you have to really hold it, kind of loosely, because old books are presented as if they were current fact, right?
Yeah.
So word of caution, don't steer, do follow that curiosity and keep a little bit of a cautionary mind behind it.
Yeah, very good point. So folks don't have to wait to learn about history until till the course launches in the online wine academy, you're going to be doing a couple of webinars. So why don't you talk about the webinars that you have planned here over the next couple of months that deal with some historic subjects as it relates to wine?
Yes, I'm really excited, actually. I found in our coronavirus quarantine life that I really enjoy the webinar format, and have had great response to it as well from students. We can actually be intimate and close with each other while being far away. So webinars are an exciting way to do that. So yes, I have some great subjects coming up. History of Champagne is first up on, I think you can correct me on the date, the 20th maybe? Yeah. So of course that teaching about the history of Champagne is one of my very favorite history subjects to teach on. It's so rich and exciting. It's really thrilling for a wine that of course captures all of our imaginations. Much like the wines we're going to talk about today, sparkling wine makes us mirthful for sure. So Champagne, history of Champagne wine, history of Bourgogne wine, history of Bordeaux, are the three I think that we've got coming up. All, wonderful subjects that every single wine lover, is really engaged in.
Right, great. Yeah, so if you're interested in joining us for those webinars Tanya will be leading, you can go to our website, Napa Valley Wine Academy, and look under the live online course section. You'll find those webinars listed there, and we'd love to have you join. If you haven't joined one of Tanya's webinars, they are absolutely spectacular, not to be missed. She really brings the subject to life. So, speaking of that, why don't we move on to today's subject, because I know that's everyone's excited about that as well. Yeah. So, Italian sparkling wines. People don't often think of Italy first when they think of sparkling wines, although it produces Prosecco, right, that people enjoy quite a bit. But why don't you talk a little bit about educate us a little bit on Italian sparkling wines.
Yes, well, I mean, if you know me, anybody who knows me, Christian, knows that I, of course, love champagne. You all know that now, and Crémant de Bourgogne, not to go unmentioned. But sometimes it surprises people when I say that Italy is the most exciting country in the world when it comes to sparkling wine. I've had some jaws drop from those that know me as a staunch Francophile. But I think that through our little talk today, I think you'll understand what I'm talking about. It's the diversity that is so profoundly exciting, and in some ways, there's the well-developed and established sparkling wine styles of Italy, and then there's a lot of off the beaten path things to discover. Just like everything in Italy, the diversity is so powerfully exciting. It can make you pull your hair out too, but it attracts a certain kind of person. So I guess I want to start by kind of identifying in our blurb on Facebook, I said, I used the word bolloncini. What does that mean? Bubbles, right? So this is the kind of the broad category. We refer to sparkling wine as bubbles here in English too. And in Italian, that refers to two main categories, which are frizzante and spumante, right? So frizzante is the less pressurized, so between 1 and 2.5 atmospheres, while spumante is the fully sparkling version, so 3+, usually between 5 and 6, but 3+ qualifies as spumante or fully sparkling. And those wines are made essentially via 4 methods with 3 primary. The first one would be metodo classico, or the traditional method in English. The second would be metodo italiano, also known as the Martinotti method, or tank method, or some know it as Charmat method, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But for Italians, it's the Martinotti method, and this is tank method. The third method is the Asti method, which is a kind of a version of tank method that only sees one slow, cool fermentation, so the Asti method. And then the last would be much more rare, but definitely present, is the ancestral method, right? That would include Prosecco's col fondo, for example, and lots of wines that are kind of off the DOC track as well are made in that method. I guess let's begin now that we've kind of gotten an overview of the basic categories. Let's talk about history, because certainly the ancestral method, sparkling wine, we didn't really notice, fermentation creates CO2, right, and alcohol and heat. But we wouldn't notice it until wine started to be bottled, which didn't really happen. We didn't have glass technology strong enough to create bottles to hold wine until the 16th century, and that really actually when King James made a proclamation that wood shouldn't be used to fire glass ovens because he wanted to use all of his wood for warships against Spain. And so essentially it came about that coal would be used, and one of the great results of using coal was that hotter fires would burn, and that meant stronger glass. So prior to really the 17th century, wine wasn't sold in bottle, it was sold in cask. And so in colder climates and places where they make wine in caves, like Champagne, for example, in continental climates in particular, often in the fall, fermentation would, kind of naturally arrest when the temperatures got too cold and start up again in the spring. And frequently the wine would have already been sold by then, but if it was sold in cask, those bubbles would just dissipate from that secondary fermentation. Once we started bottling wine, well, they were captured. And that's, a long story that I'll tell in Champagne as well. But so in Italy, we have reference to bubbles dating back to actually, quite ancient times. In fact, maybe the most ancient kind of question of bubbles would have been that Bracchetto d'Acqui was notably, or what we know as Bracchetto d'Acqui today, was a famed favorite of Cleopatra. And some of the descriptors there refer to the liveliness of the wine, the aromatics, and its sweetness, right? So some indicators that maybe a little bit of that effervescence, would have still been captured when people were drinking wine. So we have reference to ancient effervescence in kind of loose ways, but we see more solid references once wine starts to get bottled. And in the late 16th century, actually in Franciacorta, a pharmacist by the name of Porfite describes Franciacorta as being mordace, which means biting, right? And we can maybe infer that that referred to the acidity, but also maybe to the prickle of the bubbles. And so it's interesting to note that these regions in Italy that came about to make sparkling wine by traditional method had experienced their own examples of secondary fermentation, just like Champagne did when wine started to be bottled. And then, there are other regions that have really clear examples and evidence of the sparkle kind of occurring naturally. Orvieto is a great example of that, where they have wine is produced frequently in tuff caves, so in volcanic caves, and also in marine sedimentary clay and sandy stone caves. And Umbria has a continental climate as well. So it's well documented back to the Middle Ages in Orvieto that fermentations would kind of lumber along and halt during the winter, and that a wine would be produced that would be naturally kind of off dry and fizzy to different degrees, and that's been prized as well. Interestingly enough, Orvieto doesn't have a sparkling category in its DOC, but the sparkling reality is alive and well in non-DOC wines and in historic wines of Orvieto. So there's a lot of evidence that bubbles are not owned by France, right? And so we really actually start to see sparkling wine as a product in Italy around the same time that it happens in the rest of the world, around the mid 1860s, when Italians start to interact with the French as a result, probably pressed by the phylloxera epidemic, which spurred a lot of scientific development and technologies in the wine industry. And a fellow by the name of Carlo Gancia, who was an Astiano. He was from Asti, and he went and moved to Reims in Champagne, and when he came back to Piemonte, he brought with him the traditional method. So interesting to note that the first sparkling Moscatos in Asti were made by traditional method, just like the first sparkling wines in Prosecco were as well, for some time. Interestingly, in Prosecco, not long after that, Antonio Carpene, who founded also the great first big enological school in Italy, in Conegliano, he also famously applied the traditional method to wines made by the grape we now know as Glera, or then Prosecco, in the 1870s. So the first Proseccos were also made by traditional method, but At a certain point, actually, in the late 1800s, a fellow by the name of Federico Martinotti had a brilliant idea, and he elaborated on that idea and patented the process of making sparkling wine intentionally via second fermentation in a tank, and those tanks would have been actually large wood tanks at the time. And the purpose of this wasn't to make a cheaper version of traditional method wine, and it's really important to note this. The purpose, I think the main purpose of using tank method for certain wines in Italy is not to industrialize the traditional method, but to encapsulate the freshness of aromatic and semi-aromatic varieties like Moscato, Glera, Bracchetto. And so it's really not a lesser cousin to the traditional method. It's in and of itself, it has its own merit, right, and its own value system, which is a little bit different than the value system of Champagne or Bourgogne, where the grape varieties are more neutral. So it was in 1930 that we see the first Proseccos come about as tank method, and most of us know tank method as the term Charmat method. And a Frenchman by the name of Eugene Charmat, shortly after Martinotti, he industrialized the method for stainless steel tanks, and so he got a lot of the fame for industrializing the method. But in Italy, definitely tank method is referred to as Martinotti method or Metodo Italiano. So moving on, I guess I want to talk about Franciacorta just a little bit because this is, of course, Franciacorta is considered to be by many the greatest sparkling wine in Italy, and certainly the greatest kind of rival to Champagne style, one of the greatest in the world, of course. And it's really fascinating to note that, pardon me, that it's only been about 60 years since the very first traditional method commercial bottling of Franciacorta was made. And so this was actually the first Pinot de Franciacorta, it was called. And it was actually made with Pinot Bianco, not with Chardonnay, which is the main component of Franciacorta today. When Guido Berlucci and Franco Ziliani, winemaker and winery owner, got together and decided they were going to make a Champagne-style wine. And in 1961, this first wine came out. So it's interesting that today, as I said, Chardonnay is the main grape variety of Franciacorta, and Pinot Bianco can only make up not more than 50% of the blend today. Really, in practice, makes up quite a bit less, as it's been determined to be kind of less noble for that purpose. But Franciacorta has done a lot of kind of marketing magic. In the Champagne lecture, we'll talk a lot about the marketing magic of Champagne, and they've taken a lot of cues from that long history of marketing magic. They are one of the only, along with Champagne, regions in the world that doesn't have to say AOC or DOC behind its name, that it's just Franciacorta, right, or just Champagne. And that's, pretty huge. And they also rival in terms of quality. They have the longest non-vintage bottling, the longest lees age requirement for non-vintage bottles at 18 months, as opposed to 15 months total in cellar and 12 for Champagne. So they have kind of really taken it very seriously, pushing their quality marketing message. And these regions, even the ones that, we could call Champagne-ish wines, right? One of the wonderful things about Italian sparkling Metodo Classico wines is they express their own terroirs. Franciacorta has a much totally different soil, milder kind of environment than Champagne. And so it's really not as urgent to blend in back vintages, right? Or reserve wines. And so we get a more more frequently vintage bottlings, right? Which makes it possible to make sparkling wine. It's more economic to make sparkling wine that way. And so throughout Italy, we see lots and lots of traditional method sparkling wines that are a lot less expensive. And we can ask ourselves, well, why is that? Is that just Champagne's stronghold on the market that they can charge so much? But in some ways, it really is that they don't have to keep these, years and years and years of reserve wines to make these complex blends, which really I argue, is the magic of champagne. So that is also really, really wonderful. But in Italy, we see more vintage bottlings, right? And so more kind of pure vintage expression, and as a result, lots of really long lees aging times. So there's a few great, besides Franciacorta, there's a few great Metodo Classico wines. Of course, Oltrepo Pavese Metodo Classico, which is a DOCG, dominated by Pinot Nero, right? So Franciacorta, you can think Chardonnay dominant. Metodo Classico, Oltrepo Pavese Metodo Classico, which is a really fun one to say fast 5 times, is dominated by Pinot Nero. And then we have Trento Doc, which has this wonderful catchy brand name, really. It's Trento Doc, right? Interestingly enough, I was thinking Trento Doc probably will never become a DOCG, because not that it's not worthy, but they've put all this energy into marketing and branding the Trento Doc, kind of, which is a brand name, really, and a good one. So Trento Doc is based on mostly on Chardonnay, Pinot Grigio, as well. And then we have Alta Langa, which is, rather new and really small in production, also based on Pinot Nero and Chardonnay in Piemonte. So these are all great examples, and that's a DOCG as well, of high quality traditional method Italian sparkling wines. But there are at least 150 DOCs throughout Italy that include traditional method in their disciplinare, which, for example, Gavi, Verdicchio dei Castelli di Jesi, Lugana, Soave, all of those have sparkling wine included in their rule books, right? And then beyond that, one of the things I find really the most exciting is because of this kind of more temperate, overall climates in the Italic Peninsula, people, as you go through Italy, many, many, many producers, whether the region includes sparkling wine in their disciplinare or not, have just these artisanal bottles of sparkling, hand-riddled, often small batch production wines that are so exciting. Often they're sold only cellar door. So it's really something that, when you're in Italy, it's something to always, keep your eye out for. Often made by indigenous grape varieties, like Sagrantino di Montefalco. You can find these amazing, wonderful bottlings of rosé from Sagrantino, which is just so beautiful. Sometimes for 13, 14 euros as you're going along.
You have a special bottle with you today, right?
I do. On that subject, I do have a bottle with me today. This is what I'm drinking today. If you can see, this is Decugnano de Barbi from Orvieto. And the property here, you can see it's vintage. It's a Brut 2014 with a 0 dosage. And again, with the kind of riper fruit, we don't need as much dosage here. And you'll notice on the back, I don't know if you can see it, it just says Vino Spumante di Qualità Metodo Classico. And that's because there is no, as I mentioned, rules for sparkling wine in Orvieto DOC. So this wine is actually produced in caves that were carved and have been used for making wine since 1212, when the little chapel on the property, Decugnano, was occupied by monks who were making wine. So we have clay and sandy terroirs and these amazing caves. And this wine sees 4 years on the lees in those caves, gets hand-riddled, and then hand disgorged in the caves. It's pretty, so super artisanal. There's only 10,000 bottles made. And so it's very autolytic. And I'm going to give it a smell here. Unfortunately, you can't get this wine in the U.S., although the Orvieto wines and IGT wines of Decugnano de Barbi are distributed by Epic Wines in California and Unique Wines in Washington. This one isn't here yet. So if you want this wine, people, you got to talk to your sales reps and press them.
So you're basically just teasing us today, really.
I'm teasing you. I'm trying to also, I just want to kind of pull out the yearning to discover. And also, I really feel that as scholars, we drive the market. The things that we want bring exciting wines to our region. So the more we learn, the more we yearn, the more exciting stuff shows up in our market. So there's a purpose to my teas. And so in this wine, we get this, it's very kind of, it's super, kind of bread crust and yeasty and kind of white flowers. and a little kind of like clean, earthy, mushroomy, with some even kind of underripe apricot and stone fruit. This is 50-50 Chardonnay and Pinot Nero. And the bubbles are really fine. Actually, they're very fine, but it's a little bit lower in pressure. So it's not 6. It's not sharp. Actually, the acidity is just, kind of milking my mouth. But but it's not harsh, right? It's got this creamy softness. So I think that the atmospheres are a little bit lower here than we might find in a lot of champagne bottlings, which makes it very gastronomic, right? So great wine for food. So it's just bone dry, incredibly elegant. And I'm so glad I opened it because now I get to drink it today.
Can you show us the bottle again? Because I know people will be really
Yeah.
interested to see what. Great. And so it's traditional method.
Yeah.
And you said how long on the lees?
So 4 years.
4 years. Wow. So very autolytic in its character.
Really get that. Yeah.
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 Great.
I mean, essentially, they've determined that the most kind of aromatic impact on the wine happens between 18 months and 5 years on the lees. So if you want to get a wine that's really, truly, kind of complex as a result of that lees aging, you really do have to, give it more time on the lees. Yeah.
So how much do you tell us a little bit about the winery? I mean, obviously you mentioned the caves a bit, that they have these fantastic caves. Do they produce anything else, or are they strictly
Oh, yeah.
focused on sparkling wine?
Yeah, interestingly enough, so the current proprietor is Enzo Barbi, and he's probably out there right now, and a friend of mine. And his father Claudio is from Franciacorta, from Brescia. So he found this property, and with a love for Chardonnay, he found these amazing clay, sandy soils and these caves. And I think that is probably one of the great things that attracted him to that area. So they've been making sparkling wine since the 70s, since the beginning. But they're Orvieto producers, so they make Orvieto wines, of course, and IGT Umbria red wines as well. And actually, they were the first Orvieto producer to bottle a Muffato, so a purely noble rot wine, and that they call Pourriture Nobile after the French. So it's a really dynamic and beautiful property too. So you can get those Orvieto and IGT red wines here in the U.S.
That's great, fantastic. So before we and first of all, thanks so much.
And I work for them, so
You do. You get paid in wine, hopefully.
I'm not being paid. I'm strictly an educator. I make sure that I'm never beholden to anybody.
That's great.
Never know.
That's great.
Yeah.
So before we go, I mean, you've given us a master class, a little tease of a master class on sparkling wines of Italy. But give our viewers a recommendation for 3 sparkling wines that they should be trying now from Italy. If you had to give a recommendation of 3 that show a good spectrum of what Italy has to offer.
Yeah. So I'm not going to give producers because people are calling from all over the world, and I, it's hard to really say. I don't want to send people on goose chases. But, I already mentioned a few. I would say that I have a great love for Asti wines, Asti DOCG and Moscato d'Asti, and they have some very exciting things happening in their DOC right now. They've added a traditional method possibility to the Asti Dolce category. So it's interesting that they only allow the traditional method for the sweeter wine, and I think that is because they want to balance autolytic and aromatic components. And if the traditional method is applied to the too dry of wines, I think it could obscure, right? So again, this value system towards the aromatics and indigenous local grape varieties. So I would say explore Asti for sure. I mean, definitely something everybody knows about, but but a wonderful appellation that I think is often kind of not understood for the extraordinary quality and pleasure that can happen there. Also, really low alcohols, so kind of can't hurt you. And then I would say also, another tank method wine, the wines of Prosecco, which are, it's complicated because the Prosecco DOC is so big. And so there's a lot of bulk Prosecco being produced out there. It can be produced from almost anywhere in the Veneto and Friuli Venezia Giulia. But, especially from Valdobbiadene, Conegliano, and Asolo DOCGs, or even the subzone of Valdobbiadene, Conegliano, Cartizze, right? We talked about this in the Heroic Viticulture webinar I did recently. There's some incredible artisanal wines to be discovered from these Prosecco DOCGs that are just, they're inexpensive, they're fabulous, and they have a lot of stories to tell. So I guess that would be, those would be two. And then, I don't think that anybody would be disappointed by exploring Franciacorta. There's only about 200 producers there. And the wines are more expensive than some other Italian traditional method sparkling wines because of, how well they've done with getting their messaging out there. But they're still really well worth their prices. So every time I open a new bottle of Franciacorta, I think, God, thank God I did that. So, yeah.
Great. Yeah. Well, I know I'm going to go into my cellar and get some Franciacorta or Trentadoc tonight. Love wines from both of those regions. You've definitely made me thirsty. Yes. I want to thank you for taking the time today to join us for this Facebook Live. If you don't follow Tanya on Instagram, you absolutely should, right? Follow the Cellar Muse. Great educational content, and you'll be able to stay in touch with what she's up to. Like we said, she's doing some webinars that are available on our site, so check those out. And then also stay tuned for the wine history class that we'll be launching on the online Wine Academy here later on this year. Tanya, anything else you want to say to the viewers before we say goodbye?
No, so great to be able to meet you in the virtual world. It's one of the silver linings of everything that's happening, is being able to connect with people farther and wider. So please feel free to reach out to me. You can message me on social media or go onto my website, www.cellarmuse.com, and send me an email. I love to hear from people, and I also I'm doing mentoring on the Napa Valley Wine Academy page as well. Mm-hmm. So love to connect with you guys.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Thanks for pointing that out. So if you want to pick Tanya's brain on anything history related or anything, just as you can see from this Facebook Live, Tanya has a deep breadth and depth of knowledge of many different subjects, and definitely a passion. So do reach out to her. And Tanya, thanks so much. Look forward to having you back. Maybe we can tease you back for a wine history trivia Facebook Live. I think could be a lot of fun as well.
I think we can arrange that.
Great. Well, have a fantastic and glorious Saturday. I really appreciate you joining us today. Thank you, everyone out there, for joining us for this Facebook Live. Tanya is the only one with wine. I'm drinking. I'm keeping hydrated. But I wish you a really great Saturday. Drink well, be well, and we'll see you back here on Monday for another installment of our trivia. And then we'll have Tanya back for a trivia at some point very soon. But in the meantime, cheers, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.